OK, so here's a network. This is one of my favorite networks. There we go. So this is our on-prem network. And Veriflow is deployed in 2 virtual machines. So the collector VM is deployed on premises. And it's got a simple job, which is to connect to these devices. So outbound connections, and it pulls back information from each device in the network, the data plane state. This least common denominator today is generally SSH. If there's APIs, you take advantage of it. Unfortunately, some devices we have to use Telnet, right? So the faster the industry can move towards API-based models, we're all on board with that because it makes our lives easier, and also it's more efficient. This state is then, and by the way, I should mention here, there's no agent installed on devices, no software on devices. It's read-only, and it's a relatively small amount of information we're pulling out. This is then handed off to the verification engine, which does all the real work. So I got to draw a big box here. OK? So the verification engine crunches. So it does that normalization. And then that's handed off in the pipeline to building the predictive model. OK? Now, on top of the predictive model, then we can verify. OK? And then, of course, we have APIs and visualization.
When you normalize the data, is that sort of a Veriflow data model? Is this, converting vendor-specific things into vendor-neutral, industry-standard data models?
That's right. Exactly. Yep. So we have an abstraction layer internally that's device independent, that represents sort of any way of processing bits in packets. And then every device gets encoded into that.
Is that like an open config thing, or is it like you guys built the model and that's?
We built the model.
Okay.
Yeah, we built the model. But it's the kind of thing where, it's synthesizing what devices typically do.
Out of curiosity, can you use the API to pull the raw data that you normalized? Instead of going into the devices and do show IP route myself, if I already have your product, can I do show IP route using your API?
Oh, I see. Well, you can query our system to ask what the result was when we did it, to see the raw data. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So you have access to raw data.
We keep all the raw data. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I have access to the time series database of the raw data?
You have access to it at all times. Yes. Everything that gets collected.
No. I mean, can I look at what the state of the routing and echoes was on January 1st?
Yes. If you did a collection on January 1st.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
Would you do first degree of aggregation on the collector in Hadoop-like fashion? So you've got distribution of first processing line on collectors, and then verification engine gets all the jobs.
Yeah, there may be multiple collectors and multiple points that feed into the verification.
But would you stream to your verification engine all the data on the collector, or collector will do first degree of normalization?
Oh, the normalization is always on the verification engine. So the goal is to keep this as simple as possible. It's really it's there for security purposes primarily, which this is the only VM that talks directly to devices. So all it does is collect the raw data and hands it off, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And we want the raw data anyway, right? So we want to be able to access the raw data if we need to.
Speaking about time series database, can I build the predictive model for January 1st, because there was an incident on January 1st,
Yes.
and look at how the traffic would have been flowing through my network on January 1st.
Yes, you can go back in time and say what was going on. Let me ask the query then, and let me then see how that changed over time.
How far back can you go?
So you can keep as much data as you want.
Depends on your disk space.
Yeah, it's your disk space, but it's like 1 megabyte-ish per device per snapshot. So you can multiply that out. So it's disks are cheap, so we recommend keeping everything.
Well, and just practically, from a compliance, internal compliance and external compliance, right? The historical way is man hours, brute force, doing audits of the network, spending hours and hours, and if you have to go back in time, you've had to document all this.
No, for compliance and forensics, this is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, just this alone from an ROI standpoint, the man hours it takes to ensure compliance internally or externally. If you had Price Waterhouse coming in and do an audit and you have to go back in time, they're spending 60 hours a month documenting.
Just one more question.
Yes.
I could trigger the state collection on demand, right?
Yes, you can.
So I could, in theory, trigger this every time I get a syslog event saying someone has changed the config or an interface went down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be awesome for forensics.
Yes.
So how do you map intent to end result? Imagine my intent is to new BGP session. I know I'm going to learn 100 more routes.
Okay.
What if I establish BGP session and I learn 50,000 routes?
That never happens.
No.
So we do collect routing table information. You'll be able to see protocol state. You can see some of that in the demo. So that's basically anything that's in our database here, you can query. Now, some things we haven't built into a kind of like an intent. You'll see we have these templates for intent and searches. Some things we haven't built in there. You can do with an interactive search instead, and then that can be you can take that search and make it kind of like a standing query. Or you can use our API to do more flexible analysis.
To elaborate on my question, imagine you've got incoming route map on the session, which should potentially filter out anything that shouldn't be coming in.
Yeah.
Would you be able to see, hey, your route map is too permissive. You might get stuff you didn't want to.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if I understand correctly, you'd put in a intent rule that said something like, these devices should never have more than 1,000 routes learned on them. And then you'd get a violation and you'd see it and you could look at what the routes were and where they came from. So in the architecture here, this is kind of the basic. Like you build this model and then you verify. Something that we learned, yes, okay. Something that we learned actually is that it's more than just verification. It's not just about verification. There are a lot of interesting ways that you can analyze the model, right? And so this factorization here became very valuable, in fact. So in addition to verification, of course, I just mentioned actually interactive search, visualization on top of that. And we're adding new capabilities as well. So intent inference basically is a kind of analysis that queries the model to understand things, to determine what to verify. And then diffing, I'll put it over here, but it's kind of built on the same model. Diffing is kind of a temporal analysis across multiple snapshots, so using that in a different way. And prediction from me, I think what you'll see from this kind of technology in the future months and years is that there's probably a lot of interesting kinds of analysis you can do with this network-wide model.
Since you're not doing emulation,
we should look for interesting things in the future.
Question.
Yes.
Since you're not, I guess, doing emulation, could you in some way predict that vendor A's platform would work and vendors B wouldn't, given some goal you want to accomplish?
Let's see. So there's for a pre-flight check, there are cases where we would catch those problems. Today, within the scope of access control changes, yes. And then more broadly, after deployment, we'll see inconsistencies that you might not ordinarily notice until much later when the effects actually manifest themselves. And it might be hard to trace back, so we can see that immediately.
Are you
faulty chem cable tables, for example?
Yeah. Yep. We have many of those checks in by default. Yeah.
Are you doing learning or verification every time change is coming, or there's some degree of statefulness? So, going to machine learning, do you remember when you did similar change last time and what was the result? So you could either say it's good, maybe it's less good.
Yeah. So I don't know if this covers the full scope of what you have in mind, which is a great direction. I love it. Something that we do is incremental verification, where as changes come in, we don't have to start from scratch. And you can check out our research paper about, if you're in like the software-defined world where you really have good APIs, you can actually verify down to the millisecond level scale. So, controller asking questions millisecond to millisecond. What if I make this change? What if I make this change? Will it violate any goal that I'm trying to achieve? And you can get there with incremental verification. So let me just mention the other two key features that we are announcing today, which augment this platform. I mentioned new kinds of analysis, diffing and inference. And then there's new kinds of data that we can pull in. So that includes Cloud Predict, where I should call this cloud, in fact. We're pulling data from the cloud and bringing it into the product so that there's one unified picture across the hybrid infrastructure. And then pre-flight also feeds into the model. Whoops. By saying, okay, what would happen in this hypothetical network? If I made this change, how would that affect the model? And then the verification and everything else. So as you'll see, everything that you can do in a live snapshot, you can interact with in this hypothetical network as well.
Okay, so you have this collector to pull stuff from inside the network. Have you thought about pulling stuff from Looking Glass and some of the BGP sites? Because
Good question, yeah.
okay, it works inside, but I screwed up something and the network doesn't, the rest of the internet doesn't know how to get back to me.
Yeah, I like that.
Somebody else took over my prefix.
I like that direction,
Very good
definitely.
question.
Yeah, the more awareness you have, the better. And in some cases, you are dependent on external entities to do their job, and you're going to be blamed if something
Or
goes
to
wrong.
not screw up their job.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would be valuable.
A non-technical
So-
question.
So does that exist or not? You have a collector?
No, we are not collecting
Okay.
like public internet routing information. There's nothing really stopping us from folding that into the model as well. But today the product doesn't do that. But I like the idea. Thank you.
What's your target? Oh, I'm sorry. Just continue.
So there was another whole thing here that I'm trying to wrap my head around with this model. And
Yeah.
it seems that the network is the source of truth for this model. Would you talk about the network being the source of truth for the intent versus your real intent? You mentioned a spreadsheet that you'd worked with a customer before,
Right.
where they'd expressed their intent. So where do I get the source of truth for what my network really should look like?
Right. So there's the source of truth of the actual network, which is the state of the network. And then we basically have to match that up with the intent. And you're asking, where do we get the intent? So if we can get that from the user, if they have it, if they want to explicitly describe it, that's great. Right? And in many cases, the business goal, it's particular to the business. You need to express that, and maybe for some kind of crown jewel assets, you'll do that.
And so how is that expressed that works with your model? your engine?
So we'll see that in the demo. You'll
Okay.
see some examples. We have kind of templates for common kinds of intent. We have this more expressive search language, and there's an API as well.
Okay.
So that's great. The idea of intent inference is that networks are complex, and what we've learned from customers is that very often the engineers don't know what the intent is themselves, right? Because they don't know the whole network. Joe built that data center. He left 2 years ago. I merged with this other firm. I never even touched those devices. I don't know what they are, and it could take some time to just be able to express that, even if you set about doing it. So we're trying to provide value immediately by inferring, saying, I can see what you were trying to do there. Let me verify if it actually happened. And we'll see some examples.
And I might argue that everybody has intent. It's just up here. Everybody has built intent. It's just they have never transcoded it into the network. So when I talk to someone and we sit down, they have all their intents in their head. They may have some of it written down, right? They may say, oh, I have 18 data centers and I want them to do da-da-da-da. Well, that's an intent. You have your intent. It's translating that now into a way that you can manifest in the network.
So a simple one at the operational level is I have an access switch, and my intent is for it to be dual homed to a pair of distribution switches.
Right.
Okay, operationally, that's what I want to have happen.
That's correct.
And I want to be able to go verify that in the network. Okay, I can take a look at it here. Do I have the right resilience? There's your resilience
Exactly.
That's
analysis.
right. That's right.
But I should put that in as an intent.
That's right. You have this business intent up here, but it gets translated into port 180 or some other issue. That what we're trying to bring it up a level. You have it. There's never been a way to express it.
Yeah. So I'm interested in how we as network operators express that intent to make the engine tell us when the intent isn't matched.
It's a very important question.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll see some examples. So I'm going to actually wrap up with just 2 more thoughts. So the first is, what we're trying to do here overall is close this gap between the business goal and the reality. And it's, with the realization that the network is becoming closer and closer to software in many ways. And one of those is that it's really like building your own distributed software application. We can adopt good software design methodology, like kind of the DevOps philosophy, to do rapid evolution of the software, and throughout all phases, designing, building, and operating, providing that assurance continuously. So that's the vision. The second thing that I want to mention is why we're really excited about this is one of the the coolest new technologies in networking today. But it's something that you can use today. It's not, you don't have to take verification and deploy it in some greenfield corner of the data center. When we do trials with customers, we ask them, give us the real messy network, the multi-vendor, brownfield, multi-protocol network that you have, and you can apply this very new technology to that to start moving to a more automated, more intent-based view of the world. So you get that value immediately now, and then it also positions the enterprise so that you can make changes and evolve to new technologies more quickly in the future, because you've got this assurance that, okay, I'm meeting the goal. So it's kind of both very exciting and also very practical to work with today. So that's why we're excited.
And what I would like to see in the demo is I have this network and I'm proposing this change to this configuration or changing this box, which is not a data plane operation. You're collecting data plane information.
That's right.
I'm giving you config information.
That's right.
How does that analysis then result in go, no-go decisions?
Right. Yes. So the pre-flight capability that we've announced today is for access control changes. I think you're asking something like routing changes, which is on the roadmap.
ACL changes.
And that's definitely the direction that we're in.
So what's your target?
So
imagine I love your product. I want to deploy it tomorrow. Should I be a data center, enterprise, service provider? who are you targeting first? You're a startup. You have to be very sharp in your strategy, right?
Yeah, so of course, yeah, you're right. I mean, we would love to be able to say, hey, data centers, for financial market, be very laser focused. What we found is, as companies have come to us, there's this kind of classic 4 use cases that keep coming up, and it doesn't really matter. The same issue that we're facing in a financial will be the same in healthcare. And by the way, even in a mobile operators network, same basic use cases. So yeah, we'd like to be more focused, but we found ourselves focusing more on the use case across different verticals. So we're not trying to solve world hunger with lots of different use cases. Right now, it's kind of targeted at these 4 to begin with.